Okay, so the topic of the hour is don't lose deals. We're going to put a few things on the screen tonight to kind of make you think, maybe think about things differently than you have in the past. But we're going to talk about agency and compensation specifically, much more from the buyer standpoint, although we could do a completely another Monday night on this topic, probably 4 or 5 times, and not cover enough content that we need to cover. So we're going to give you a little taste tonight from the buyer's side of things, from the buyer agency part, and talk about some conversation tactics that you may want to consider in your business. Before we do that, I have to turn it over to Shannon because we still have people that are doing some common drafting errors. So she's like, can you just not put me to the end? I'm like, no, start from the beginning. We need to get the word out. You just are not writing up a deal anymore. There are some common drafting errors. We're still taking, anybody that has a managing broker's license is still experiencing having conversations with the agents, and we're almost training other people from other companies at this point.
Yeah, it's
Drafting.
tricky. I'm dealing with one of these probably every single week. It's all the time. We're having conversations about this. It's like, yes, the RCW code changed in Washington at least in January, but we're dealing with it still even now a year later. So, we don't just write up deals. That just doesn't happen. It doesn't matter which state you're licensed in. For us in Best Choice, you can't just write up a deal. There are agency services that are involved in it, and there's more than just your name on a paper. It's not the way that it works in any of those states for that matter. So we have to have a service agreement in place. We cannot receive compensation if there is no buyer service agreement in place if you are representing the buyer. So what ends up happening is those commissions just end up coming to our office, and then they curtail and they turn back and go back to escrow. And we don't want to be in that situation for any of you. You guys put a lot of work into your transactions. We certainly want to see those compensation to be paid out. It is not Shannon law. This is RCW law, state laws that are indicating this. So don't be mad at the messenger. In many cases, we just need to be following the law on how we're handling our agency duties. Some of the common issues that are coming up, these are ones that someone could make a claim that they did not have a valid service agreement in place with you. They are not due any sort of compensation for you for representing them. The dates on the agreement. So just be careful on what date you indicate on the top of when the agency agreement is dated. Not necessarily the signature dates, although those are important as well, but just making sure the date the agreement starts matches up to be either the same day or before the date the offer is written. That comes up a lot. You would be very much surprised. Missing signatures, the agent as well. For some reason, it's like we go so fast, I get it, but the agent also needs to sign the service agreement. So just make sure you're signing the service agreements along with your clients. And the other one that kind of gets caught up too, that's not helpful at all, is putting 0 for compensation when you're representing the buyer. It's not helpful. In essence, you're not getting paid a dime in those situations. So we want to make sure that that matches what your compensation, what your professional fee is. So thank you for my soapbox moment.
We need a quick reminder for some people, and also this is recorded. So this is, we're not the only firm that's experiencing this. Every designated broker meeting I've gone to in the last 3 or 4 months, we've talked about these common drafting errors, and these seem to be the 3 that everybody's discussing. Let's go to the next. So this is a beautiful home. This is a beautiful condo right there on Ruston Way, and this could be yours. And this was an error that was made by just an agent not properly building a relationship. And so yours truly went ahead and I built a relationship with a client, and I got the opportunity of representing a client who will have a view that looks like this here, hopefully, as long as the inspection goes through okay. But I wanted to share the story with you because it definitely talks about how we don't lose deals. And it's best if we talk about what to do. And so when these things fall in my lap, sometimes I use them as educational opportunities so that we can all learn from errors or potential errors, or just really how to keep deals together and how to win at what we do as a career. So this view is beautiful. I just have to take a minute and just take it all in. I mean, we could picture having a consultation out there on that patio, and I know I've run on that trail back there. So it's a fun little place that I got an opportunity to represent. Let's go to the next slide. So how to secure a relationship. I think when we get so hung up about the paperwork, no offense, Shannon, but the important drafting errors, but we got to remember that when we start these relationships, there's a process to doing these types of things, and top producers understand the process. And sometimes I forget that some of you maybe have gotten into the business maybe only 3 or 4 years ago and need probably a refresher on how you want to secure these relationships, because it can almost come across confusing, or the consumer being confused themselves with all of these changes nationally that are going on could maybe misconstrue what you're saying. And so I want to remind you that there's 3 parts that most top producers use when securing a buyer relationship. Number 1, they're going to do an initial consultation. They will most likely have some sort of checklist, something that they write down, or they have a set of questions. Luckily for you guys, you're going to get my top 10 questions that I use, and I've used regularly. Today, you're going to get that. But what matters most to that client? You take it from the approach that what's most important to the buyer in the case that we're going to talk about today. So there's initial consultation checklist. Then there is some sort of tangible pre-presentation template, like a package or a folder or a tangible flyer. I've seen all kinds of things. I've seen a binder. I've seen a PowerPoint slide. I've seen all kinds of things I've seen as far as a presentation template that they use when they're conversing with their buyers. They set expectations. They maybe have their lender attend that pre-presentation template, but they have something prepared that they can provide. And then the third thing that they're going to have to secure the relationship, think like a listing when they're securing their buyers, is they're going to have a representation agreement along with their presentation. They're going to embed that so that they can answer questions about that legal document with that potential buyer. So I went on an appointment, and Shannon knows about this, so I'm sorry, Shannon, you get to hear the story again, and same thing with Candace. I've already told the story a couple times, but I got a phone call from a referral of a listing that I closed a few months ago. It was a very, very challenging listing, and it was a commercial broker that I've worked with in the past. And I did such a great job, and also another agent on this call did a great job with me working this client. But we went out to his home, did a fabulous job, and he referred me, specifically me, to handle a sensitive situation with an estate. Somebody that is going into a nursing facility, and she wanted to have representation. So I went on a listing appointment. The power of attorney was going to be there at the appointment, and I only had 12 hours to prepare. So it was Monday, and she was getting on a flight on Tuesday. So I didn't have very much time. So I definitely used this 3-step approach, but luckily for me, I had already trained myself on what kind of questions to ask. I already had a presentation. This was a listing presentation in this case. And then I began to go over the listing documents that this particular individual would be signing. And I stopped myself and asked certain questions, almost like how they wanted to be represented. And that's how that got started. So I got done with the listing appointment. I let the heir review the paperwork, because it was quite a bit, since it was an estate type of situation. And we went ahead, and I told her that I would give her a call when she landed, and we could kind of go over any questions that she had. I had another appointment I had to run to. When I was driving back to Tukwila, I got a phone call from the heir. And she appreciated how I talked about my presentation, and she appreciated how I handled the questions that her mother had. Her mom was in her 80s, and I was answering questions about representation. And this is what got me thinking about it. She goes, "I want to pivot on you, Rochelle." And I said, "What do you mean by pivot?" And she goes, "Well, actually, my husband and I, while we were in town, we're actually looking at a place. When we get mom's home sold, we're considering buying something for us. And we were hoping that you would represent us in the purchase of a home in the Pierce County region." I said, "Okay, let me ask you a few more questions then." And so let's go to the next slide, Shannon. These were some of the questions. Now, this is actually, go back 1/2 step. There we go. This was the guide. I used our new guide And I incorporated that in and I said, here is the buying guide. If for some reason you have a friend or a family member, it's the newest thing I have in my office. I just want to leave this here with you. So I left the buying guide, but she was so impressed with the buying guide that's what prompted not only the buying guide, but the prompting of the questions, how I was asking and talking about agency. And that's what prompted her to call me and ask for representation. So there are some questions that I ask, and I've toyed with this for the last decade of trying to teach you guys how to ask the questions. Now, certainly you might ask them differently. You're going to want to build rapport when you have this initial conversation, but you go into a conversation or a dialogue with a potential buyer that looks kind of like what you're going to see on the screen. I already ran this past Shannon, and she uses a similar type of verbiage, but for the most part, these are the questions that we ask. And I've tried to train you guys how to build your own scripts, but for whatever reason, some of you just need to up your game a little bit and get more buyers, especially when it's challenging out there. So why reinvent the wheel? This is what top producers are using as their warm-up, their icebreakers, and the dialogue, the questions they're asking to get the ball moved into the right direction. Obviously, we want them to sign a buyer service agreement with us. So here's how it would go. On the phone, if we're using my example, I'm driving from Tukwila, so I know I only have about a 15-minute conversation. The conversation runs about 15 minutes if you're asking all of the questions. Tell me what type of property you are looking for is the next question I asked her after we kind of got over the formalities of like, how are we going to pivot? Well, she's considering hiring me as a buyer's agent. Tell me what type of property you're looking for. She says, I'm looking for a condo, something that's low maintenance. Fantastic. Next question. What areas are you exploring, or what areas are you considering? You could ask it many different ways, but we want to understand the scope or the area. She said Ruston Way, Tacoma area. If we can't get something on the waterfront, we may be open to other areas. Okay, let's go to the next one. What properties have you seen already? Well, we actually toured through some open houses over the weekend. So we saw quite a few condos that are on the market. So then there's a little star next to that. And the reason for that is because you might want to bring up one of the questions that are down below, which I did in the actual conversation. But if there's not kind of room for like, did they sign something? You kind of get that vibe. Then you could go into number 4. What properties have you seen already? I haven't seen anything. In my case, she had, so I wanted to ask another follow-up question to that. Number 4, what's your time frame? You can ask that in multiple different ways, but that's knowing their time frame, when they want to be in a property. You could say, when do you want to be into your next property? You can ask it many different ways. What's your time frame seems to be a very easy way to ask. Then the 5th question would be, what's prompting you to start looking now? Many brokers forget to ask the why question. And that kind of sets them back, because then they end up having to show a lot more properties, or having multiple, meetings to try to understand the why. If you can understand the motivation of what the buyer is, what they're searching for, it often helps scale your appointments down and the type of appointments you're going on, or the type of properties that you're going to be sending them, if you could understand the reason for why. In this case, they want to be close to mom. And when the house sells, when mom sells the property with me, and there's still a lot of work we need to do to get the property prepped. But when that's done, they still want to have a place where they can come and experience the Seattle lifestyle and the Tacoma lifestyle, and be close to mom. So that was the idea. The next, number 6, I didn't have to ask that question because I already knew. I asked them in the appointment if the mom has already found a place to actually purchase. She's actually going into a rest home or a retirement facility. So she's already got that lined up. So I'd already asked number 6, but you do want to ask that question. There was a study that was done about 10 or 12 years ago that said, when you're talking with buyers, how many of them, maybe I'll ask Shannon this, how many of them, what percentage do you think have to sell a home in order to buy? There's a study done.
A lot more than you think. I think it's, I don't know. Let's just throw a number, 50%.
15, you said 15%?
I'll say, yeah, 15%. Let's say 15%.
15%. So it's actually 25%. We've done a study that says 1 out of 4, and these would be an online buyer pool. how many buyers, if they were going to register on a website, maybe they went to Zillow, how many of them will actually have to find or have to sell their home in order to buy another one? The study that we did almost a decade ago was 25%. So we did the study because we wanted to find out, should these people, if we're going to be entertaining a lot more seller leads or taking more sellers back a decade ago, don't you think we want to ask that question? Do they have a home to buy? Do they have a home to sell? Oftentimes, 1 out of 4 of those buyer leads will actually have a home to sell. And oh my gosh, you could pick up another deal that way just by asking a simple question. So if you don't know the answer to that, definitely incorporate that into your questions to ask a buyer. Do you have to sell your home in order to buy another? Or do you have to sell your home in order for you to qualify to move forward? You can ask it many different ways, but that's a good question to ask as well. Number 7 question. I love the way this is framed. Will you be paying cash or will you need to secure financing? And I think I like this one the best because it puts that first thing it kind of bolsters your ego a little bit. Like if I was a buyer, I'd want to kind of know that I could pay cash. So it kind of frames it in a way like, gosh, I have cash or I'm going to be paying cash. I'm kind of like, I got an edge. Or do I need to secure financing? Do I need help in securing financing? It gives me an opportunity to say, no, I'm paying cash, or yes, I'm going to secure financing, but I've already made application with XYZ company. Number 7, if they need to secure financing, ask a follow-up question to ask who they're working with. That's the way I would ask the question. Don't ask them if they're pre-approved. That will offend them. I've already done a lot of vetting on that. Don't do that. But just ask the question, will you be paying cash or would you need to secure financing for this? It makes them feel really good and supported.
Yeah, I think what some people have, what they fall into is they say, have you already been pre-approved? And they just lead right into that. How much do you want to pay? I mean, it's very abrasive in that way. When you say, will you be paying cash or will you need to secure financing? It's almost like a compliment at the same time where they're like,
Yeah.
oh, my agent thinks I could potentially pay cash, even though I may or may not be able to. But it's phrased in such a way that it's like, regardless of the circumstances, cash or financing, how can I consultate, in a consultative way, help you?
Yeah, and we've tried putting this up sooner and it actually works better later in the conversation. So if I was going to, and I did ask this question because I needed to ask this question, and it came naturally in the conversation after I asked her what's prompting you to really start looking now. And she's like, explained her reasoning why. And then the next question I asked, because I didn't have to ask number 6, was, will you be paying cash or need to secure financing? Do you know what she said to me, Shannon?
Cash.
Cash. I got a cash buyer. So let's go to number 8. Notice I didn't ask like, oh, are you going to provide proof of funds or anything like that. That came later, especially when we're going to write the offer and we're going to work on that. But I just wanted to understand how they're paying, and what, if they needed to secure the financing. The next question that I actually asked earlier up, that's why it had a star next to it, because of how they answered number 3. What properties have you seen already? They said they'd already seen some properties. So I made the assumption that I asked a follow-up question. Have you signed anything with another agent as you were touring those homes? And she was very quick to tell me, no, I did not sign anything. I told them that I would be working with our attorney or somebody that we trusted, and that I did not want to work with somebody that was representing the seller. So the person that actually opened the door for her, for this particular condo, was representing the seller, and he was very clear to point that out to her. Now let's go to number 9. When do you have time to sit down? So now, mind you, she was getting on an airplane to fly back to Texas, and we went ahead and scheduled a Zoom so that we could discuss the next steps. And the next steps in this case was fast-tracked because of the questions I asked. I did a consultation, a very short consultation. It took me about an hour to sit down and go over the consultation. And then right after I finished the consultation, I wrote the offer on Zoom, you guys. That's how quick it went. So if you're doing the proper rapport, setting the relationships, asking the questions, and then asking follow-up questions like, tell me more about that, explain more to me, really have a robust conversation. I had a 15-minute conversation on the phone, a full hour And I built rapport when I met them initially when I was at their mom's house. So start to finish, it can go very quickly. And you can say that I was lucky, but I would say I beg to differ with that content. It wasn't luck. There was a lot of preparation that went into obviously preparing for my appointment with the mom, and then also asking the questions and all the experience that I have and knowing how to build that conversation so that the client felt comfortable. Yeah, so if you want to take a quick screenshot of those 10 questions, Candace and I and Shannon, we all talked about these. This is what she uses too. So it's taking some of your scripting and kind of really getting you the meat and the potatoes right on the plate here.
Yeah, I have a lot of conversations with some agents where they go, maybe I'm not in this full time. I'm not in all the time. You don't have to be in it all the time in order to be able to come across as a professional. And one of the things you can do is have questions like this in your arsenal that you're trained, or like at least to have in the back of your mind, or have them written down, so that you're prepared when someone says, hey, I'm interested in this property, or I want to go buy a house. You start asking some of these questions in a series, and it will posture you up immensely. So doesn't matter where you at or how you know them. They could be an internet lead. They could be someone that you are neighbors with. It doesn't matter. They work with all of those circumstances, and it's building rapport, build a relationship, so that way it's more comfortable to bring up the concept of agency.
Okay, let's go into the next slide because we can get to the dual agency. So this other agent, here's what he did. So funny, I submitted the offer an hour before the client called me at like late at night, and we messaged back and forth because after the weekend, it took him a couple days to get this over, but he basically sent a draft of the purchase and sale agreement for their review. So this was his attempt at doing a consultation. Notice though that the closing date was TBD, the purchase price was TBD. I'm not saying this is wrong. In fact, some of you may use this strategy and might work well with certain clients. For this particular client, they wanted to have the relationship built one-to-one. They wanted to be pen to paper in sitting down in an office space or in a safe, comfortable location, aka their mom's house. But he took this approach, and I'm not saying that this is wrong. In fact, I probably would use it in certain cases. But he indicated on, if you look at the last bullet point, it says page 31 to 32 is a buyer broker service agreement. I structure my BBSAs as non-exclusive rather than exclusive. And then I highlighted it for you. This is the part that just struck a nerve with her. I believe in earning the right to work with you. So if I don't live up to your expectations, you are not contractually bound to work with me. The seller is paying the commission on the sale, so there will be no commissions payable to you. So that kind of struck for the consumer. They want their own representation. So even though he would be a dual agent in this case, and in Idaho, same thing, it would be a dual agent, the client was not comfortable. In fact, it turned the client off in this case. And she was so happy to have found me and sign a buyer service agreement right off the bat before we put the offer in. And I had the joy of negotiating with this individual, and we are getting along splendidly. But I think it's important to bring up that it's okay to converse like this, but you have to understand your client, the relationship you're building, the questions to ask, and understand and be able to educate the client on the advantage and the disadvantages of being a dual agent. Each pamphlet or brochure that you give that client hopefully will educate them and advise them, and you're comfortable in how you're explaining that blue brochure in Idaho, the pamphlet in Washington, the disclosures in Oregon, making sure that you understand how to properly communicate with your client, because I guarantee it, they're reading that stuff and they probably didn't do that before. All of the stuff going on last year, it's made those consumers take a hard look at the materials that you're putting in front of them and how you're properly communicating, or maybe lack of communicating. But this is not wrong, it's just not what the client wanted. So that was an example of that. Let's go to the next slide. the exclusive versus the non-exclusive. Shannon, you want to cue this one up and kind of explain what we had to
Yeah,
experience
so
on
this
this?
one's kind of an interesting situation. I'm not sure if the agent is actually on the call tonight. I think they might be. But this particular situation, we were the listing agent. We had a showing that was done on the property. They had an agent that was showing the home. They showed the property. After the showing, the client reached out directly. They called the agent on the sign, which just so happens to be our agent, and says, I don't want to, I want to buy this house. Can you help me, represent me? Can you put it together? This is what I want to do. And the listing agent was smart enough to know. He said, I recognize your name. Weren't you showing the property with so-and-so? And the client was quick to say, no. Well, yes, I did walk through with that person, but I have no desire to work with them. And so our agent was smart and asked more questions and said, well, did you sign anything with this particular agent? And they said, yes, here, I'll send it to you right now. You can see it. I can work with anybody. And so he sends over the agreement to our agent, the listing agent, and it very clearly was a non-exclusive buyer service agreement. So in that situation, what is our agent to do? So he called us and he says, can I write this up? Can I write this deal together? Can I be a limited dual agency in this scenario? So that way that my seller can sell this house. He obviously wants to sell it. The terms that the buyer is proposing are perfectly acceptable. Can I do this? I'm nervous because I've already been in communication with this buyer's agent, supposed buyer's agent, right? So, long story short, we told him, yes, you absolutely can. A non-exclusive is a non-exclusive. Make sure you have an exclusive relationship with that buyer, and there's no question. He got a service agreement signed with the buyer. They authorized him to be a limited dual agent very clearly. He explained everything perfectly. And we had the fun job as a brokerage to respond to the firm representing the other agent involved. And this was their response that they sent to us. So do you want me just to read it, Rochelle, for those that are
I can
driving?
read it. I'll call out the key points here
Okay.
that people can read on the screen, but this is the email. I took out the names and I took out, the important parts that would, cue somebody into something. But I think it's important to notice that you've got a listing agent has a duty. This is the way that the designated broker framed the situation that Shannon described. But as a professional, read the middle paragraph, but as a professional, as someone that knows another agent had spent a fair amount of time, some of you guys that are buyer's agent or proposing that you're buyer's agents, you've spent a lot of time. If you do not have an exclusive buyer agency agreement with somebody, you may want to rethink that relationship, or you may want to figure out why you're not getting the exclusive, why they're holding back on you. There's probably a question mark. And in this case, there was. This particular agent showed up late. This particular agent was not very professional in how he looked and how he dressed. And this particular agent dropped balls left and right. And so this particular agent was not the agent that they would have wanted to represent them when they are purchasing a very high-end purchase. So they had the choice and the clients called the shots. So this designated broker is trying to say, I've also made the call, and yes, it sucks, but at least it doesn't have the other agent not knowing what the heck is going on. Now, communication is important, but when you're in contract, you have a duty to maintain, the communication becomes, don't have to share everything when the client
There's a
comes.
confidential type of situation where unless the buyer and seller have given you permission to disclose certain information, you're not obligated to disclose everything. So there is an element of that, yes.
Yeah. And then the last paragraph, she says, I will also say that I strongly feel that how all this went down, that a referral fee is owed. I'm just about dying here at this point, you can imagine. You knew writing the offer that we had done some of the work for the clients, and when I have been in this position, that is what I have done. Of course, we know we cannot enforce that, and with all these new rules, procuring cause is a dead issue, but that would be the right thing to do. So this becomes a kind of an internal battle, I would say, between real estate firms on how we play nice with each other in the sandbox. But at the end of the day, the relationship that you have with the client is utmost and more important than the relationship you have with the other agent that is trying to get into contract or trying to serve, which it's very challenging. And I know you guys have probably experienced this, but no, I politely responded. I appreciated her response and looking into the situation. We did not pay a referral fee on this one that was not needed. This was an education for her agent on the difference between an exclusive and a non-exclusive buyer service agreement. And it's unfortunate that it had to be that way, but at the end of the day, the consumer was the one that called the shots. Okay, I think that was a wrap. You guys have any thoughts about that? Any questions? It's a little bit after 6. I am going to open up the line because I'd love to hear your thoughts about that situation, another situation, or any questions that you have about the content that we talked about tonight. Candace, you reached out. You've had a couple of phone calls, I think your direction too. Did we cover everything?
I'm trying to unmute. I've been having technical difficulties all day with my Zoom, so apologies. But I want to say, and this past weekend, I had a Zoom listing appointment, and I also had today, I had a kind of like a brief buyer's update, buyer's consult update. And I just want to share with you guys, our buyers and our sellers are out there. I discovered in my listing presentation, it's and I'll just a little bit about it. It's a divorcing family that I know, they're divorcing, and she is planning to buy. So in the discovery, I mean, we're just having our listing appointment. She's already out touring open houses. So I am going to encourage you guys to make sure that you are talking to people up front, whether they're a seller or a buyer, and discovering these questions. Get those questions asked and answered. I also had today just a quick update. This was a buyer from 2023 that kind of got pushed out of the market a little bit. And she left a voicemail on my phone. So I called her back today, and it's like, okay, it's an update. I'm kind of ready to start looking, although I know that she's in a lease and signed a lease last year. And once again, here I have a buyer who in my head is not ready to buy yet. But guess what? She was at an open house this weekend looking and had a conversation with another agent. The name was thrown, and I'm thinking, okay, I actually recall seeing this property, and I thought, oh my goodness, we need to really have these discussions. Stay in front of your clients, make sure you're uncovering, where they're at consistently, because I mean, I'm like, we haven't even listed your house for sale. I know that I'm listing it, but she's already out looking at open homes, at open houses and touring open houses. So get in front of your clients, ask the questions. That list that Rochelle has is a great list just for discovery. And you can literally read it verbatim if you want to. At some point you kind of start memorizing these questions, but it's a great list. So
thank you, Candace,
think-
for sharing. I
Hey,
think
this
picking
is
up your
a-
phone is a
I'm
good
sorry.
thing to do. That kind
Go
of
for it,
trying
Harry.
to call people back is hard, but
Yeah, Harry had a question, Rochelle. Go for it.
oh, go ahead, Harry.
Well, it's not really a question. I think it's just more of a comment. I think I did a screenshot of the questions, and one of the things that helps a lot that I used to do before I would speak in front of a group is I would practice a lot. I would record myself. I would practice my cadence. I'd practice just rehearse over and over, and then watch yourself back. If you do that, I know it might be embarrassing, but it's just you. Do it in your house. Nobody has to see it. You'll get better. You'll get better at it and you'll feel much more natural when you're having that conversation with a client. And
Right.
so then when you are in that spur of the moment, you'll just have it down. You'll have it memorized. So it'll just flow. You won't be pausing. You won't be that kind of thing. And it makes it much more professional and natural. So I would just encourage everybody that's on this call to actually practice those questions that were presented tonight, because it's going to really help a lot. I'm in a kind of a pickle right now with one of my sellers. I'm trying to sell a townhome in Mount Lake Terrace, but it's a day sleeper. And so I cannot have any showings before 6 or 7 p.m., 7 days a week. I have someone wanting to schedule an inspection but it cannot be an inspection except for a Tuesday after 5. These people are like, what is going on? So you're going to have some clients, and of course she's going to be a buyer, but she doesn't want to see a house, but it's just, you're going to have clients that are challenging. But I did have one question at the very end. I have
Okay.
a new buyers, real nice folks, but they have very little capital. They have barely enough to maybe have the down payment.
Okay.
Closing costs I'm gonna have to try to get that paid for by the seller. And then I keep sending them. They're on a list, and I've sent them all the documentations. I've met them in person. I went over everything that they need, and they haven't signed the buyer agreement. And so then they
Okay.
call me Saturday morning and says, "Oh, we want to go see this house in Monroe." And I said, "Hey, I'd love to show it to you, but I really do have to have that contract signed because and I forwarded the law. I said, it's not me, I promise." And they're like, "Oh, well, we haven't had the time to look at the contract." I said, "Well, when you have time and you get that signed, please let me know, because this is a great house. It checks almost all your boxes." All right. So, and it's been on the market 58 days. So it might be a prime opportunity for us to get celebrate closing, and they still haven't signed. So,
May I intercept here? This is
of
what I
course,
would do. And this is what I've done, and it's been very successful, is I take the buyer service agreement with me to the showing. And after the showing, I have them sign it. Or in this case, because you've had so many conversations, have them sign it while you're showing the house. Schedule extra time. Because they don't, the thing is they don't know what they don't know, and they need to sometimes get excited about a property.
I think that's a
So
great idea. And the other thing I did tell, I've had a buyer in the past, and they're like, "Well, how long is this good for?" I said, "Listen, we're not married. We don't have to go through an official divorce. If you decide, hey, if you don't want me to represent you buying moving forward, just let me know. We'll sever the contract. It's okay, but we do need to have something in writing before I can show you,
Yeah.
actually let you in the house."
yeah.
Yep. And I
Let's
had
take it with
another
you.
question real quick that was kind of the point. One of our agents, he's a managing broker out here in Idaho, and he's like, it's a different type of buyer service agreement in Idaho, but can they write an exclusion? Yeah, you could. So like they wanted to sign something, but they wanted to be excluded from like an off-market property that they would negotiate on their behalf. Again, it's up to the firm on how we're going to hold them accountable to that. So if you tell me, Rochelle, we're not going to enforce this one, I'm not going to enforce it. But you don't want to tell them that. You just want to really get them to put pen to paper. Virginia's not wrong on the approach, Harry.
Absolutely.
If you want to blame it on me, you can blame it on me. Tell them that the
I'll
office,
be the bad dog. Rochelle can be the
Yeah.
bad dog.
the office identified that Terry was out showing a lot of properties and needs to have a service agreement because of all the lawsuits that are going on. That we need to make us the bad guy if you want, Harry. If it helps you get the appointment. But at the end of the day, it's not worth the paper it's sent on if you can't, we can't get that relationship tied up in that type of way.
Well, and you gotta, I think a lot of us, I mean, I'm still fairly new. I feel like I'm learning a little bit more now, but I do realize at this point on my 5th year that there are going to be some buyers that just aren't really ready. They're just not. They don't have the ability financially, and they don't have they're not willing to pull that trigger. And you have to understand, okay, we're still going to be in contact with them. We're still going to encourage them. We're going to always make sure we're available for professionals, but you got to put them aside and move the people that are already ready to pull the trigger. Right.
Correct.
So put your efforts where you're going to get some return on your investment, and don't lose them, because I think they will. I've had buyers come back 2 years later. They're like, "Hey, we're finally ready. Hey, fantastic. I'm glad I sent you that Christmas card."
Yep.
So it's kind of like the car thing, right? It's like you don't really, you're looking at cars, you're beating around, you're not quite right, but then you drive by that dealership and you see the car and you sit in it and you're like, holy crap, let me sign. And that's kind of what you're doing by getting them in the house and signing the agreement at the house, right? And I got to work on how I use my bad words, and I apologize, but that's kind of the feeling.
No, I like that. I actually did that with a guy out on Camino Island. Had him sign it on the hood of my car.
Yep. Have them printed. Nothing wrong with that.
I want to share this because it does kind of like echo my sentiments when it comes to prepping for the consultation. So thank you, Rick, for sharing. But he goes, "My late father often said, luck is where preparedness meets opportunity." I love that.
Yeah, Rick, maybe you're going to be on deck here one of these Monday nights. Share the gift of gab with your late father.
Yeah, bring the Rick Burrows generational, generational wisdom. I think it's great.
It's great.
Yeah.
Super good. Any other questions that you guys had? Hopefully that sparked some discussion, some thoughts. And that
This
is
is
definitely
Erica. I just wanted to ask what we thought about, like, when is a good time to ask if there's any other decision makers, like basically a significant other that will be going on the home search.
it's a great question. And you know what? It's funny with Candace and Shannon and I, it is one of the questions that we do ask. We didn't put in the 10, but that's a good question to probably consider. I'm glad you brought that up. I would probably consider maybe putting that into your top 10 things that you ask. In my case, in my example, I already met with both of them, so I knew, but I certainly, if you didn't know who you're working with, there's nothing wrong with asking. I would probably tend to put that towards the end though.
Yeah, I would echo Rochelle's idea there too, Erica, where it's like once you get to the point where you're talking logistics, it's like, okay, is there anybody else that we need to include in the process? In terms of when you're purchasing a home, someone that's maybe being a co-signer, someone who's helping with a down payment. I mean, basically anybody that kind of falls in that category. Is there anybody else we need to include in this consultation who's involved in your buying? Yeah.
Awesome. And sometimes you meet that person and you have a similar communication style to them.
Yeah.
And so you all sometimes can hit it off with them even better than your original client. It sounds, Rochelle, like you knocked it out of the park, though.
Yeah, no, so far so good. I never count my chickens before they hatch though. We gotta see if it goes through inspection and onward, but that's a potential, that's roughly, 900K, and you could do the math on how much commission that would be. That's an opportunity just because somebody doesn't know how to explain, exclusive versus non-exclusive to a client. Right? I mean, so that's where the rub is can we do a
I
better
think
job?
it's
There's certainly
also
room to learn.
rapport as well. It's also that particular person probably didn't do a very good job. They had a question mark over their name with that particular client. So what could they have done better to establish better rapport? So when they entered into and explained that, that agency relationship, they felt more comfortable moving forward. I think that's probably where they had some missteps there as well. So there's several things we can learn from that scenario.
Super. Thank you so much. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully we'll see some of you guys on the Thursday training. And all right, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you, you guys.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys this next Monday.
Hey.